I do not know why I am the one telling this. I'm a land steward. I manage drainage surveys and tenant disputes and the quarterly timber accounts for Ravenmoor Park, and I have done so for 19 years without once being asked to account for anything that could not be measured in pounds or acres. And yet here I am, the only witness left who saw the whole of it, the beginning, the middle, and the long, expensive end. And so I suppose the telling falls to me. Her name was Nell Ashford. She came to Ravenmoor in the autumn of 1841 as secretary to the Dowager Duchess, His Grace's mother, a precise and formidable woman who required precise and formidable assistance and had the sense to hire it. I was present the morning Miss Ashford arrived. She stepped down from the carrier's coach with a leather case in each hand, a gray wool traveling cloak, and an expression of such composed readiness that I remember thinking she looked less like a new employee and more like someone returning to a post she'd already held. She was perhaps 25. She shook my hand when I introduced myself and asked, without preamble, where she might find the correspondence room. I showed her. She thanked me. And that for 3 years was the entirety of our acquaintance, not because she was cold but because she was busy and she did not waste words on people who had not earned them. She was extraordinary at the work. That is the only word for it. The Dowager's affairs had been in a condition of genteel chaos for the better part of a decade, unanswered letters, overlapping charitable obligations, household accounts that had been reconciled by optimism rather than arithmetic. Miss Ashford sorted them in 6 weeks. She established a filing system of such logical elegance that I, a man who has spent his adult life in the management of complex estates, paused before it one afternoon and felt something close to professional envy. She learned every tenant's name, not because it was required, but because it was useful. She remembered the dietary preferences of every guest who had visited more than twice. She wrote letters in 3 registers, formal, warm, and the precise diplomatic middle that neither commits nor offends, and she chose the correct one every time. The Dowager Duchess adored her. Caspian Vane, the 8th Duke of Ravenmoor, barely knew she existed. This is the thing I have turned over many times in the years since. He was not cruel to her. He was not dismissive in any way that could be pointed at and named. He simply looked past her, the way you look past a well-made piece of furniture, grateful for its function, unaware of its weight. She was present at every household discussion of consequence because the Dowager brought her, and he would speak to her when the topic required it, with politeness, with efficiency, with no recognition whatsoever that she was a person of particular intelligence or feeling. She was the correspondence secretary. She managed things. He noted the management and moved on. I watched this for 3 years and said nothing, because it was not my business and because, in truth, I did not fully understand what I was watching until it was over. The summer of 1844 is when it shifted. The Dowager's health began to falter in June, nothing dramatic, a gradual drawing inward that the doctors named with words I have since forgotten, and the great house acquired a different atmosphere. Quieter, more watchful. His Grace spent more time at Ravenmoor than was his habit. He was attentive to his mother in the way that men of his type are attentive when they finally understand that something will not last, which is to say thoroughly and somewhat late. And in August, Lady Prescott arrived. She was a widow, recently returned from 3 years on the continent, and she was, I will be accurate, very beautiful, and very skilled at the particular art of making powerful men feel that her beauty was specifically for them. She had been introduced to His Grace at a house party in Berkshire the previous season, and she came to Ravenmoor at the Dowager's invitation, though I was never entirely certain whose idea the invitation had originally been. She brought 2 maids, a quantity of luggage that required its own cart, and an attention for Caspian Vane that was thorough, practiced, and if I am being unkind, professionally applied. He was not immune to it. He was 37 years old, unmarried, and accustomed to being deferred to, and Lady Prescott deferred to him in a way that was simultaneously flattering and exciting, because she was clever enough to make the deference look like choice rather than performance. Within a fortnight of her arrival, the household had rearranged itself around her. Dinner was later, because she preferred it. The morning rides were organized to her schedule. The correspondence room, Miss Ashford's domain, was requisitioned 2 afternoons a week so that Lady Prescott might write her letters in what she described as the best light in the house. I did not see Miss Ashford's face when she was told this. I only know that she relocated her work to the steward's room adjacent to the library without complaint, and that the filing system remained in perfect order throughout, and that the dowager's affairs suffered no interruption. She was, in every measurable sense, unchanged. That is what I remember most. While the house bent and shifted to accommodate its guest, Nell Ashford continued to do her work with the same quiet precision she had always applied to it, and her expression gave away nothing at all. I think now that this was not indifference. I think it was pride of a very particular kind, not the pride that bristles, but the pride that does not give a careless man the satisfaction of knowing he has been careless. The dowager died in September. It was expected, and it was peaceful, and it was nevertheless a grief that settled over Ravenmoor like weather. His Grace bore it in the manner of his character, without display, without self-pity, with a soldierly steadiness that I respected even as I suspected it cost him considerably more than it appeared to. He managed the arrangements, received the condolences, signed the necessary documents. He did not sleep, I think, but I was not privy to that. Miss Ashford managed the household correspondence surrounding the death with a thoroughness that went beyond anything required of her. Acknowledgments to each of the 314 letters of condolence that arrived in the fortnight following, personal, individual, not a single one duplicated. The dowager's charitable accounts settled and transferred to the appropriate trustees. The household records prepared and indexed for whatever disposition His Grace might choose to make of them. She did all of this in 12 days. On the 13th day, she submitted a letter of resignation. It was the correct thing to do, strictly speaking. Her appointment had been to the dowager's household specifically, and with the dowager gone, her position was technically dissolved. She was owed nothing beyond her notice and a reference. She asked for neither, only enclosed an inventory of all outstanding correspondence matters and noted that she would depart on the Friday. His Grace, when the letter was placed before him, said, "Very good. See that she has a proper reference from the estate." I wrote it myself. It was the finest reference letter I have ever composed, and I have composed several hundred. I stated, with complete accuracy, that Miss Nell Ashford was among the most capable individuals I had encountered in 19 years of estate management, that she had given 3 years of service to Ravenmoor Park that exceeded in quality anything that could reasonably have been required of her, and that whoever engaged her next would find themselves in possession of something they had not fully earned. I did not show it to His Grace before I sent it. She left on the Friday, as she had said she would. The leather cases, there were 3 now, she had arrived with 2, were carried to the hired coach at 6:30 in the morning. I was at the window of the steward's room when she came down the stone steps from the east entrance. She wore the same gray wool cloak she had worn when she arrived. She looked once at the forecourt, at the gravel, the beeches beyond the wall, the particular angle of early autumn light that falls across the front of Ravenmoor Park in a way that is, I will admit, rather fine, and then she put her hand up to the coachman and climbed in. She did not look back. She did not leave a note for His Grace. She did not say goodbye to anyone except, I was told afterward by the housekeeper, Mrs. Draper, whom she had sat with for 20 minutes the previous evening over a pot of tea, and then embraced at the door with a warmth that left the older woman in tears for the better part of an hour. His Grace did not see her go. He was, I believe, at breakfast with Lady Prescott, who had remained at Ravenmoor following the bereavement out of, she described it, reluctance to leave him in such a time. For approximately 3 weeks, nothing changed. Lady Prescott continued in residence. His Grace continued in his habits, the morning ride, the estate business, the evenings in the drawing room with his guest, who had a gift for making the evenings feel eventful without requiring much to actually occur. The correspondence room was restored to general use. A new secretary was interviewed and then not engaged, and then another was interviewed and also not engaged, for reasons that His Grace did not articulate but which I suspected had to do with the fact that neither of them was able to operate the filing system. It was in the 4th week that I noticed the first signs of what I can only describe, with retrospective precision, as a man becoming slightly haunted. It was nothing dramatic, a longer pause before answering a question, a habit new to him of standing in doorways for a moment before entering a room, as if checking for something. He began once to say, "Ask Miss," before stopping himself with a brevity that suggested the correction had to be made more often than once. The estate accounts, which Miss Ashford had maintained as a courtesy alongside her primary work, sat for 2 weeks without being touched, and when I finally organized them myself, I found a quality of note-keeping in the previous columns that was so clear, and considered that I stood for a moment in the quiet of the steward's room, feeling something I could not quite name. In the 5th week, Lady Prescott left. There was no dramatic conclusion to the attachment, or if there was, I was not witness to it. She departed on a Tuesday with a great deal of luggage and a great deal of composed graciousness, and His Grace saw her to her carriage and stood on the steps until it rounded the beeches, and then came inside and walked directly to the library and was not seen again until dinner. The season ended, autumn deepened, Ravenmoor went into its winter rhythms. He was restless in a way he had not been before. I noticed it in small things, the estate books picked up and put down again, meetings called and then postponed, a ride taken out in weather that was, candidly, unsuitable. He was not unhappy in any way that he would have named or that anyone watching from a comfortable distance would have identified. He was simply unsettled, as if something had gone out of true in the mechanism of his life, and he could not locate the source of the imbalance. It was in December that he asked me, with a studied casualness that did not suit him, whether I happened to know where Miss Ashford had gone. I told him I did. I had been the one who sent the reference letter, and I had directed it to Fenwick Cross, a wool market village in the neighboring county, where a cousin of hers lived, and where she had written that she intended to settle while she considered her next position. I had not heard anything further from her, but I had reason to believe she was still there. He said, "I see," in the tone of a man who is filing the information rather than acting on it. He acted on it in January. He rode out on a clear, cold Wednesday morning, without announcement, and returned late that afternoon with mud on his boots and an expression I could not read. He said nothing of where he had been. He ate dinner with his usual economy, reviewed the weekly accounts I'd laid out, noted one figure that required clarification, and went to bed. I found out the following week, from no particularly deliberate inquiry, only from being the kind of man that people speak to in passing, that a well-dressed man on a gray horse had appeared in Fenwick Cross on the Wednesday, asked directions to the cottage at the end of Plover Lane, and had been there for approximately 40 minutes before riding back the way he had come. I do not know what was said at that meeting. I asked him once eventually, when enough time had passed and I had sufficient standing in the matter, and he told me, with a flatness that was itself a kind of admission, that she had offered him tea and asked how Ravenmoor was keeping, and that the conversation had been so entirely polite that he had been left with nothing to argue against and nothing to agree with, and that he had ridden 20 miles in the cold and come home feeling like a man who had shown up to a duel and found the field empty. She was not cold, he said. That is the maddening thing, Fletcher. She was perfectly warm. She asked after Draper and the kitchen garden and the Barclay tenants who'd had the fence dispute. She remembered everything, and then she showed me to the door. He paused. She did not ask me why I had come. I waited. Which means, he said, that she already knew. I left that alone, because he was, I could see, beginning to understand something, and men of his type require time and privacy for understanding to complete its work. February was a long month. He undertook a survey of the North Acreage that had been deferred for 2 years, which required a good deal of writing in conditions that were, again, not ideal, and which I suspected was less about drainage remediation than about the necessity of having somewhere purposeful to be. He attended a political dinner in London, and returned after 4 days looking no more settled than when he had left. He began reading in the evenings rather than sitting with visitors, which was new, and the books he chose were, I noticed, the sort that do not offer much in the way of comfort. He called me into the library on a Tuesday in late March. He was standing at the window that looks over the West Gallery garden, which was, at that season, a study in restraint, bare, precise, ordered. He said, "I owe her an apology." I said, "Yes." He turned and looked at me with an expression that combined mild indignation with something sheepish underneath it. "You might have said so at the time." "It wasn't my place," I told him, "and I don't think it would have helped." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do I owe her an apology for specifically?" This was, I thought, the right question. Not the easiest one, but the right one. "For 3 years of not seeing her," I said. "Not cruelly, not deliberately, only thoroughly." He looked at the window for a while. "And if I go to Fenwick Cross again?" "Then you ought to have something worth saying." He did not go in March. He spent March writing things and crossing them out, which I know because I found the papers in the library grate on several mornings. He went in April, on a Thursday, with no announcement and a different horse. The black, which is his best, which I will not pretend was coincidental. He was gone considerably longer than 40 minutes. He came home as the light was failing, and he did not come to me or go to the library, or do any of the things that usually constitute his return from a day's absence. He went directly to the West Gallery, and stood there for quite a long time. I could see him through the steward's room window, in the particular stillness of a man who is not uncertain any more, but is taking a moment to appreciate the weight of what has shifted. He came to me the following morning. "She will consider it," he said, and there was in his voice a quality I had not heard before, not quite relief, not quite humility, something between them that sat on him with a dignity he had not precisely earned but was, I thought, beginning to. "Consider what specifically?" I said, because I thought he ought to say it plainly. "Whether she is willing to give Ravenmoor another attempt," he said, "on her terms, which she has set out." He passed me a letter. It was written in a hand I recognized, clear, precise, no word wasted. The terms were as follows. She would not return to any secretarial capacity, because that arrangement had established a professional distance that had apparently been convenient for everyone except her. She would return, if she returned at all, as a woman being courted in the proper manner, with a proper period of acquaintance and no assumptions on either side. The cottage at Plover Lane would remain in her tenancy throughout, paid by her own means, so that her presence in his life was never conditional on his willingness. If at any point she found the arrangement unsuitable, she would say so, and that would be the end of it. She did not mention the word Duchess. She did not mention marriage at all. She mentioned that she had enjoyed the kitchen garden at Ravenmoor very much, and that she hoped the peas had done better this year than last. I read it to the end and handed it back. "Well," he said. "She is giving you the chance to learn to see her," I said, "which is what this has always been about." He folded the letter carefully along its existing creases, which told me it had already been folded and unfolded more than once. He put it in the inside pocket of his coat. "She is remarkable," he said quietly. "Yes," I said, She has been for 3 years and 4 months. He received this with more grace than I might have expected. The courtship, if it can be called that, and I think it must be, though it looked nothing like the variety that is conducted through ballrooms and morning calls, took the better part of the spring and into summer. He rode to Fenwick Cross on Thursdays, almost without exception, and they walked. I know this because he told me, in the abbreviated manner of a man who is not accustomed to reporting on his own emotional life, but who has decided, apparently, that I am the correct audience for it. They walked and they talked about the estate, about her cousin's business in the village, about a book he had read that she had read 6 years before and found superior, about the fence dispute, and whether the Barclay solution had held. They talked, as far as I can gather, about everything that they had never had occasion to talk about in 3 years of occupying the same house, and each conversation seemed to uncover something he had simply not known to look for. He brought her things occasionally, not grand things, not jewels or flowers in the manner of formal courtship, a book he thought she had not read, a seed catalogue because she had mentioned the kitchen garden. Once, and this is the detail I return to most often, a surveyor's map of the Fenwick Cross common land, because she had said at some point that she found the common's eastern boundary unclear, and it struck her as the sort of thing that would eventually cause a dispute, and he had had the estate surveyor prepare an accurate one. She wrote him a note when the map arrived. It said, "This is, without question, the most useful gift I have ever received." He kept that note as well. In July, on a warm afternoon with the West Gallery garden at its best, she came to Ravenmoor for the first time since the February of the previous year. She came for dinner, and she came for the afternoon beforehand, and she walked the garden with him in a silence that was, as I observed it through the window from a very appropriate distance, not the silence of constraint, but the silence of two people who have run out of the need to fill space. Mrs. Draper wept in the kitchen and tried to disguise it as an allergy to the roses. Dinner was quiet and very good. I was present at the table. The household was still without a full social staff, and His Grace had not troubled to replace the formal arrangements, and I can report that the conversation was unremarkable in the best possible way. They disagreed about the correct management of the north boundary drainage. She won. He did not concede immediately, but he conceded by the time the cheese arrived, and the concession was graceful. After dinner he walked her out to the hired carriage. She had come in one, which she had arranged herself, and I watched from the drawing-room window. They stood on the forecourt in the fading light for quite a long time. I could not see their faces. The carriage left at 9:30. He stood on the steps after it had gone, which he had not done when Lady Prescott's carriage rounded the beeches. He stood there for a good 5 minutes, and then he came inside, and there was about him, this is the only word I have found that fits, a quality of rightness that had not been there in all the months previous. He came to me the following morning, which was a Saturday, and asked me to look into the legal particulars of the Plover Lane cottage tenancy. I said the cottage remains hers. She was clear on that point. He said, "Yes, I want to know whether the tenancy can be made permanent and in her name, regardless of any other arrangement." I looked at him. "So that it is hers," he said, meeting my eye with a steadiness that was something other than the usual authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. It was the steadiness of someone who has arrived, finally, at an accurate understanding of what is required. Not a gift, not contingent, simply hers. I said I would look into it. He said, "Good." Then he said, almost as an afterthought, which I did not believe for a moment was an afterthought, "She gave 3 years to this house. Whatever happens, she will not be left without ground to stand on." I arranged the tenancy over the following week. It was straightforward enough, a long-term lease, transferred to her name, with a term structure that placed no conditions on it whatsoever. I sent it to Fenwick Cross with a brief note of my own, explaining what it was and confirming that it came from the estate with no expectation attached. Her response arrived on the Thursday. It was addressed to me. It said, "Dear Mr. Holt, thank you for the tenancy documents. I recognize what they represent and I am grateful, as much for the manner of the thing as for the thing itself. Please tell His Grace that I will come to Ravenmoor again on the Saturday, and that I would like to see the kitchen garden properly this time, if that can be arranged." I delivered the message. He received it with no visible expression, which, in my experience of him, was the reliable indicator of considerable interior movement. She came on the Saturday. The kitchen garden visit lasted 2 hours. I know this because Partridge, the head gardener, came to find me afterward with the expression of a man who has been in the presence of something notable and cannot quite account for it, and told me that Miss Ashford had asked better questions about the pea varieties than anyone had in a decade, and that His Grace had listened to every answer with a focused attention that Partridge found, and I quote, "not entirely characteristic." After the garden they went to the East Library. The door was closed for an hour. I did not listen at it because I am not that kind of man, and also because I did not need to. When she came out, she was carrying a book he had lent her, and there was in her expression a quality I had not seen in the 3 years she had been at Ravenmoor. Not happiness exactly, or not only happiness. Something more settled, more decided, as if a sum had been completed to her satisfaction, and the answer was as she had expected it might be, given sufficient evidence. He walked her to the carriage. They were on the forecourt for a shorter time than on the previous occasion, which I took to be a sign that the necessary things had been said rather than that less had occurred. She looked up at the front of Ravenmoor Park before she got into the carriage. The same angle she had looked at on the morning she left the Beeches, the stone face of the house, the particular quality of afternoon light. Then she smiled at something and got in. He stood on the steps. This time he was there when the carriage rounded the Beeches. Then he came inside, walked directly to the steward's room, sat down across the table from me, and put both hands flat on the surface in the manner of a man who has arrived somewhere and wishes to be clear about it. "She has agreed," he said. "On her terms," I said. "On her terms," he said, "all of them, including the cottage." "Good," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "You're not surprised?" "No," I said. "You've been watching this?" "For some time," I agreed. He was quiet for a moment then. "What do you think she saw in it, in agreeing?" I thought about this carefully, because it deserved care. "I think she saw that you learned to see her," I said. "Not quickly, not easily, but actually, which is worth considerably more to a woman like that than the alternative." He sat with this. "She is," he said at last, "quite the most precise person I have ever met." "Yes," I said. "It's a remarkable quality in someone who has spent several years being imprecise people's greatest asset." He received this with equanimity. Progress. The engagement was announced in September, a quiet announcement in the approved form, with no fanfare and no society performance. The wedding took place in November, in the parish church at Fenwick Cross, not the estate chapel at Ravenmoor, because she had asked for that and he had agreed without argument, which I noted as a sign of accelerating education. The cottage at Plover Lane remained in her name. I know because I have the deed on file, as I have every other document pertaining to the estate, and because she wrote me a note the week after the wedding thanking me again for arranging it, and observing that she intended to use it, at some point, as a proper retreat for the purpose of reading without interruption, and that she hoped I would not find this eccentric. I wrote back that I found it entirely sensible. I was present at Ravenmoor the first morning, after they returned from their wedding journey. I had business with His Grace, the North Acreage drainage, which had not resolved itself during all of the preceding drama, and I came to the library at 9 o'clock as is my custom. She was already there, at the desk, reading through the estate correspondence that had accumulated in their absence, with a cup of tea at her elbow and an expression of calm concentration, and on the corner of the desk, where nothing had sat for the better part of 2 years, the leather case. Not the cases she had left with. The same case she had arrived with in the autumn of 1841, gray, well-made, a little worn at the catches. She looked up when I came in. "The Barclay drainage," she said, "is in the second pile." I flagged it. I said, "Thank you, Miss, Your Grace." She gave me a look of the sort that she reserved for imprecision. "Nell," she said, "you have been calling me Miss Ashford for 4 years. I think we can manage." His Grace appeared in the doorway behind me. He saw her at the desk with the leather case and the flagged correspondence and the cup of tea, and he stood there for a moment in the same way I had once seen him stand in doorways when he was still in the process of understanding what he had lost, except that the quality of the standing was entirely different now. The door frame was not a threshold he was uncertain of. It was simply where he happened to be standing while he looked at her. She did not look up again immediately. She finished the letter she was reading and set it neatly on the second pile. Then she looked up and met his eye across the room with the level, warm precision that was entirely her own. "The peas," she said, "did better this year." He smiled, a real one, the kind that doesn't spend itself on audiences. "Yes," he said, "I thought you'd want to know." He came in and closed the door, and I took the Barclay drainage file from the second pile and let myself out, and the West Gallery garden was, outside the window, doing very well for November, and I thought as I walked back down the hall that there are some reckonings that settle in silence, and some worth knowings that take a man quite a long time to earn. She had known from the first morning, I think, what he was worth. She simply waited, with admirable patience and no particular urgency, for him to discover what she was. He did in the end, a little late but thoroughly. Which is, given the circumstances, precisely how she would have wanted it done.